Tree. My name is Tamil Kendall, and I'm the director of POWER, the Partnership for Women's Health Research Canada, which is an alliance between 4 women's health research institutes: the Women's Health Research Institute in BC, the Women and Children's Health Research Institute in Alberta, Women's College Research Institute at Women's College Hospital in Ontario, in Toronto, and IWK Health, that has a mandate for providing health services to women, children, and families in the Maritimes. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, and to express my gratitude for being an uninvited guest on these lands, and really to express appreciation for the traditional peoples of all of the territories where POWER builds relationships. So we're very lucky today to have Melissa Tremblay and Jenna Haverfield joining us for this intimate virtual mentoring and networking session. And so what's going to happen is that Jenna and then Melissa are going to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their professional trajectory. And then you will have an opportunity to choose which breakout room that you would like to go into for a more in-depth conversation, Q&A session with Jenna or with Melissa. And then we'll come back together. There'll be an opportunity to share any reflections that people want to, and then our mentors will leave us, and there will be an opportunity also for informal networking among the mentees, if people want to stay for an additional half an hour at the end of our time together. So without further ado, I will stop talking, and I will hand it over to Jenna. Oh, and just to note, we are recording this portion of the session, but after Jenna and Melissa are done doing these introductions, we will turn off the recording and there will not be any more recordings of this session. So this is a confidential and intimate space that you can feel safe to ask the questions that you want to ask and to engage in the discussions that you want to engage in. Please, Jenna, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Tamil. Thanks for the invitation to present, and it's great to see so many people here and some familiar faces. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. I just put together a little PowerPoint. It's not long, it's very brief. Let me just check if can you all see my screen? Perfect. So yeah, I'm going to just give you a brief overview of my non-linear career path, both inside and outside academia. So I'm going to start with my undergrad studies, my graduate studies, and my postdocs. And then I left academia for a period of time to work in government. And now I've come back to academia, but in a really non-traditional role. So I want to share this with you and talk a little bit about the roles that I've taken on. And I bring a bit of an international perspective. I've had a whirlwind journey across many different countries, and I'll share that with you. So I'll also be just adding in a few little lessons learned that, you know, I've taken away from my career journey that hopefully would be helpful for each and every one of you. So let me just go here. Okay, so I'm going to start with my undergrad. I'm from Australia. You can probably tell I have an accent. That's where I did all my undergraduate training. I'm a basic scientist by training, so purely at the bench in reproductive biology. So cells, tissues, animals, you name it. And I really have changed a lot across species, across reproductive organs. I really wanted to do a lot of different things there. During my PhD, I did an intensive course in the US. It's called Frontiers in Reproduction. It was a great experience. It was 6 weeks full-time in the US at the Marine Biological Laboratory. And I was also on the board of directors for the Society of the Study of Reproduction. And I put this here because it was a great networking opportunity that I'm going to come back to later. So I started my first postdoc in the UK. So I was at the University College London. That's where I first first started my postdoctoral training, and then that postdoc actually migrated to Canada, which is what brought me here. So it's still the same postdoc. I went from University College London to University of Montreal, and then I ended up doing a second postdoc, all in some form of reproductive biology and reproductive health. I did ovarian cancer, endometriosis, male fertility, maternal aging, you name it. And so at the end of my second postdoc, I was not really sure what to do. I loved science. I loved the academic job, in that fact that it was very diverse and having many different, you wear many different hats. But I also was aware of, and I'd gotten funding for fellowships, and I was doing everything right, if you like, but I still enjoyed doing, you know, the role I had at SSR on the board, the administrative side, management. I still like that. So I actually took a position outside of academia. I worked at the CHR Institute of Gender and Health, which many of you might know. You know, we advocate for including sex and gender across the health research spectrum. So I started there as a science strategy lead, and then I worked my way up to assistant director. And then after that, which is my current position, is now I'm back in academia, but I'm not in an academic appointment. So I am a scientific research manager of a new program called Derive, which I'll go into shortly. But this just gives you an overview of kind of my career journey. And I'm going to go into the more specifics of the two most recent positions I've had at the Institute of Gender and Health and then Derive. So at the Institute of Gender and Health, it was really a unique position because you would probably think, well, this is government, this is working for CHR, this is a national funding agency, and you're right. But it really straddles both academia and government. And that's because, well, the institutes themselves, the 13 institutes under the umbrella of CHR, really are, you know, the liaison between researchers and government. And so I wouldn't say that I necessarily left academia. I would say that really, I think this non-academic and academic like terms, the binary terms, you know, it's not binary, okay? It's a spectrum, and many jobs can straddle many different industries, and you can still be attached to academia while doing other positions, even in nonprofits or industry, for example. So in the academic side, I was still analyzing data. I had grants management data on the number of women and men that had applied to CHR's funding opportunities, the number of projects that were integrating sex and gender in their research. So I published manuscripts, I presented at scientific conferences, and I was advising, you know, researchers on how they can integrate sex and gender into their research. So that was the academic side of that job. And on the government side, you know, I was developing science policies, launching funding opportunities, identifying priority research areas, and then requesting more money from Treasury boards. So I guess the take-home message here is that, you know, it's not just one industry. I think all industries are interconnected, and it's important to remember that when thinking about your career journey. And so here's just to show you that these are the papers that we published while I was at the Institute of Gender and Health. So I was still actively publishing, even though I was no longer doing a postdoc. And so that really is my first lesson learned, that you can still do science and publish, even if you don't have an academic appointment. I'm still doing it now, and I was doing it at the Institute of Gender and Health. And you can do it if you're working in a nonprofit, for example. When I was at the Institute of Gender and Health, we launched funding opportunities for community organizations to apply and get funding. You know, in industry, you might have private funding to do research. So I just wanted to emphasize this, because the mindset, you might be sitting there saying, I love research, I want to stay in research and publish science, but I don't know if I want to be an academic, or it's really hard to get a tenure track position. And so this is just something I wanted to leave you with, to show that you don't necessarily have to have that kind of position to still do science. So my current position is, it's really leading a new interdisciplinary research program that was privately funded. So this is a very different approach to academia, and I've really just highlighted my diverse roles that I do in this position. So this is really my job description of what I'm doing right now. And when I first started, it wasn't called Derive. It wasn't anything. I was given a position to build this from the ground up. So along the way, you know, you can see here knowledge mobilization. I've come up with branding and a name and a logo. That's all part of the position. So I was asked to launch a new research program that spans basic science, clinical science, and population health. And so I provide strategic leadership on establishing the scientific direction for this program. And I'll go in the next slide exactly what we do. But I also provide operational leadership. So I manage the budget, I hire new staff. I build collaborations with researchers. We work with people who are genetic epidemiologists, people who are experts in AI, computational biology, clinicians. So we have to really bring together all the right people to do the research. So that's part of my job. I'm also in the lab. I really love the lab, and it was hard to step away. So I'm still back in the lab part-time. I'm working, setting up human organoid experiments and doing some gene editing there. I'm also learning to code. I never learned to code with my training, so that's something I'm excited to do. I always like to learn. I'm still applying for grants to get more funding beyond the private funding we have, so applying to CHR, NSERC, going to conferences, presenting the data we have, and in team building, supervising students, and really supporting the entire research team. So that really shows you, I guess, the diverse responsibilities that I have in this position, and it's a position that I love. It's a position that really suits me and my skills. And I think that's important to mention, because everyone, I think we are becoming more and more self-aware of what we like and what we don't like and what we want to do. And I think my non-linear pathway has led me here. And I'll get to that more in a little bit. But really, just to give you a snapshot of Derive, in case you're wondering, we really are trying to understand at a simplified level why people respond differently to environmental exposures. So it's one person, for example, who smokes their entire life might develop lung cancer, but another person who smokes may not. And we believe it's to do with the genetic variants that we express, and there's a gene-environment interaction. And so we are applying this hypothesis to test many diseases of development. So we're interested in prenatal, postnatal, and childhood development. And so we bring together the population level research, the dry lab, uncovering novel genetic variants and environmental factors. And that's the correlation part. And then the causation part is we're also functionally validating them in the lab with organoid models. So it's really cool. It's very interdisciplinary. It's very innovative. It's very high risk, high reward. And so that's really what I'm doing now, but I don't have an academic appointment. I just want to stress that. Now, my second lesson learned is that mentors advise, but sponsors act. So I really like this because mentorship and sponsorship aren't the same thing. And so mentors, we probably all have a mentor, or, on your PhD committee, your supervisor, your past supervisor, and they're great to have. They provide guidance on what steps to take and what to do next. But sponsors are really play an active role. And I think it's important to mention that they really recommend you for things and can help boost your career. Sponsors aren't as straightforward as going up and asking someone to be a sponsor, but it's really about networking and promoting yourself and making the field know who you are and what you're good at and what your strengths are, so that you're recommended for talks or for a job. So as an example, my job at the CHR Institute of Gender and Health, I got that because of a sponsor that I met through my position on the board of directors of SSR. When this position came available, I didn't even know about it, but this professor had emailed the hiring manager and said, I think Jenna would be a great fit. Watch out for her CV. And that's how it kickstarted everything. So having, networking and getting yourself out there can lead to people who advocate for you and want to see you succeed. And I think it's important to mention the two differences there. And just a couple more lessons learned before I finish. Having been on both sides of the table, and particularly now with CHR and then with Derive, employers don't get everything they want on their job ad. It's really important to mention, because we know that men are more likely, gender plays a role, men are more likely to apply for jobs even if they don't meet all the criteria compared to women and gender diverse people. So if you see a job ad and maybe you tick 7 out of 10 of the things that they want, I encourage you to still apply. That's a wish list for employers, and they really rarely get everything they want. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for jobs, and don't let it deter you from applying if you don't have everything that they're asking for. My fourth lesson is that you can reject a job offer and be headhunted at a later date. This happened to me. I was offered a position. It was a very good position, and it wasn't the right time for me personally. So I declined. And a year later, they came back and offered me the same position when it became available again. It still wasn't the right time for me. So I didn't take it. But the key message is that you should still apply for positions, even if you're not really willing to accept that. If they were to offer it to you, accept it right now. You can apply for jobs for experience. And this could then lead to other positions within the company that they might think you're more suitable to, or potentially be headhunted, down the line, as I mentioned. So just keep that in mind, and it's an experience for you when you're applying and interviewing. My last lesson that I'll leave you with is that I think nonlinear career paths are becoming the new norm. So if we just look at the academic system, the linear career path would be undergrad, graduate studies, postdoc, tenure track position. We know that not everyone who does graduate studies is going to end up like that, and not everyone wants to. And I think we have to really talk more about non-linear career paths. And by non-linear, I mean these are active, intentional choices that we are making to learn more about ourselves and our likes and our dislikes, and to learn more about different positions that are out there. It's okay to take a position just because to step outside of the academic pathway and then potentially come back in. I know someone who was appointed last year in a senior position at McGill in the Genome Centre, who had spent 10 years in industry in genetic research, and has now come back as a full professor. So this is becoming the norm, and I think we're starting to recognise the value that you bring from people who have gone and worked in various industries. So I just wanted to stress that it's okay if you don't know what you want to do, and not everyone's career path looks the same, and everyone has a different journey. And I'll just leave it there with my email and LinkedIn if you want to reach out and connect, and I'd be happy to talk more in the breakout rooms.
Thanks very much, Jenna. Melissa, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I will share my screen here. All right, so I only have a few minutes here, I know, but I did want to eat up a couple of those minutes just by starting with my own land acknowledgement. So we have the beautiful fall colors now outside, and I'm reminded of how grateful I am to call this land my home. This is a picture here of my backyard in the winter. It's hard to believe in only a few weeks it's going to look like this again. We have a moose that visits, a little moose family that visits us pretty frequently in our backyard, and our very homemade hockey rink. So I'll acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Treaty 6 territory. So Edmonton area, excuse me, which we know is a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others. So the reason I wanted to bring this in is because I like to talk about how these are not just words that are spoken at the beginning of a presentation or a meeting, but a representation of a commitment to honoring and reflecting on the relationship that I have to treaties, the land and its gifts, as well as the Indigenous peoples who continue to enrich our communities. So my acknowledgement is not only in respectful recognition of the lands on which I live, work, and play, along with my past, current, and future ancestors of these lands, but is also in recognition that I and my colleagues have a collective responsibility to take concrete actions toward uplifting the connections that we have with all of our relations. And it's through research, clinical work, teaching, and more broadly advocacy that I aim to take some of these concrete actions. So just to introduce myself, I'm a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. So my dad is Cree and Métis with roots in an Indigenous community about an hour west of Edmonton, and is part of the Lac-Saint-Anne Métis community. And my mom is French. So I am Métis, recognized as one of the groups of Indigenous peoples in Canada. That being said, like any Indigenous person, I'm coming to you today with specific lived experience and layers of privilege as a university faculty member. And so I don't ever claim to speak for any Indigenous person or community. Indigenous identity in Canada is complex, as are the experiences of the incredibly diverse Indigenous peoples in this country. I'm also a mom, so I have a picture of my 3 children on this slide. So I have a 2-year-old daughter, a 4-year-old son, and a 6-year-old son. And just on more of a professional level, this is my 6th year as a faculty member in the School and Clinical Child Psychology program. So as of July, I had achieved tenure, so an associate prof now, as well as a registered psychologist. So I'm a child psychologist. I did my PhD in the School and Clinical Child Psychology program, where I now work. So it does feel like I've been around for longer because I wasn't brand new to the faculty or the department when I started. Just in terms of my clinical background, I started out about 16 years ago when I was still an undergrad student working at a forensic psychiatric clinic in Edmonton. So I would work in a day program for people who had been found not criminally responsible. I worked with a psychologist to run relapse prevention groups. I worked as a psychometrist at Alberta Hospital Edmonton for a number of years. And really was just happy to work under the supervision of psychologists to provide assessment and intervention. Then I went back to school to do my master's in human ecology, family ecology and practice at the U of A. So I did a lot of research work at the time with the Community University Partnership for the Study of Children, Youth, and Families, which is known as CUP. They're in the School of Public Health now at the U of A. I also worked with Bentero in Edmonton and really fell in love with community-based participatory research. So I finished up my master's and then I worked for about 5 years in the Department of Pediatrics at the U of A, coordinating the evaluation of a substance abuse and violence prevention program in the community of Maskwacis, which is an Indigenous community about an hour south of Edmonton. So although I wasn't doing clinical work at the time, I was heavily immersed in research. I learned so much about ethical practice and about ways to foster the health and well-being of Indigenous children and families, and the long-lasting relationships that can be formed through community research, which was completely new to me, this idea that research could be relational. And I now have the privilege of doing my own research with Indigenous communities. My heart really lies with qualitative methods such as photo voice. When I was working in Maskwacis, we started a photo voice project to mobilize knowledge about the strengths of and resilience of the community, just given that a lot of media attention tends to focus on the negative, like drugs and gangs and violence, and health research tends to focus on those things too. So we decided to do a project in partnership with youth and elders and families to mobilize knowledge about community strengths. I now work again in Maskwacis on what's called the Early Years Program. So it's a prenatal to preschool intervention that started as a pilot in Maskwacis and has expanded across Canada. And that's in partnership with the Martin Family Initiative, which is an organization that is based in Montreal. Just gonna look what I have on my next slide. Oh, so I also have a couple of photos here that represent other projects that I'm working on. So I have a CIHR grant right now working with the early years, both to more broadly evaluate the early years program, but also to develop new developmental screening tools for screening Indigenous children with the families that work there or that live there, sorry. I also have a picture of a school here. So I do a lot of work with Boyle Street Education School, which is an alternative high school in Edmonton. So we're looking at better understanding the social, emotional, and learning needs of Indigenous students at the school who have been disengaged from traditional school settings, and also doing some work with the Edmonton Police Service to understand how police can better serve marginalized youth, including Indigenous youth. I'll also just quickly mention here, when I started my my doctoral studies, I worked under the supervision of Dr. Jackie Pye, who is an expert in FASD, and so really started to develop a grounding and understanding FASD. And so now I'm part of the Canada FASD Research Network family, so I have a role as an Indigenous research lead with the Canada FASD Research Network. So I offer this introduction to you to situate myself, and so you have an understanding of how my personal and professional ideas have been shaped and the work that my ideas are anchored in. And what I found most helpful for me as a grad student was getting involved in as many projects as I could, being supervised and mentored by lots of different people from different disciplines and who were very different methodologists, very different researchers. So I could understand what I really cared about, what I really wanted to focus my own career on. And it was through exposure to these different activities and people that I gained that understanding about myself. So right now, as an academic, I do research, and I also teach. I teach mostly in the area of child development, intervention, evaluation, and I also supervise lots of students, which is probably the best part of my job. I love supervision and mentorship of students. And then just to kind of wrap up here, I wanted to end with some little quotes that I've curated that kind of describe my philosophy as an academic. To teach Indigenous brilliance and success as much as you teach Indigenous suffering and trauma, I think is really important, in particular for health research, because health researchers have often presented bleak statistics about Indigenous people without the context of colonialism and why those bleak realities exist. And also, I love this quote about, if in academia we could shift our everyday discourse from I study, I look at, I'm interested in, I focus on, I critique, and shift that to I'm accountable to this area or the children and families who will potentially benefit from my work, or I listen or pay attention to. So I will leave it there. I think I'm out of time, so I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa, for those introductory comments. So now what's going to happen is that we will put Jenna and Melissa will each go into a Zoom breakout room, and then you, the mentees who are in the room, can choose what room they would like to join, and you'll have about 20 minutes, slightly more than 20 minutes to have a conversation, an informal discussion. So I won't take up any more time. I will send you a note just before we bring you back at about 10 to